and the judges will introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Wong. I'm a retired attorney and former judge. I'm also on the National Board of Directors for the Center for Civic Education. I live in Boise, Idaho, and I'm very excited to listen to your testimony and presentation this morning.
Good morning, students. My name is Maria Garnett. I live in Richmond. I am a state employee. I worked at JLARC, the Nonpartisan Policy Analysis Agency of the General Assembly, for the past 5 years. I recently transitioned to a role as a policy advisor for the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services. This is my 3rd year of involvement with We the People. I'm very excited to be with you this morning.
All right, good morning, students. My name is Petra Al-Sufi. I'm the Outreach and Partnerships Manager at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. We're a research and education think tank that research American Muslims and other faith communities. I'm also on the board of the Michigan Center for Civic Education. And 17 or 18 years ago, I was in your position, in your place as a student participant in We the People. So this is me telling you, I know it's stressful, enjoy the ride. It will be a really memorable moment for you, something that you'll remember, 18, 19 years after your participation. So we look forward to hearing you this morning.
So would the students please introduce themselves, tell us the name of your school, and please introduce your teacher.
I'm Noelle Rouge.
I'm Ethan Nielsen.
I'm Adam Huffman.
I'm Saja Bala.
And I am Anna Pitt.
And we are here with Glen Allen High School from Virginia with our teachers, Mr. Van Valkenburg and Mr. Conway.
Hey guys. All right. Thank you. Welcome. All right, let's get right to it. I'll read the question. This is question number 2 for Unit 6. President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Do you agree or disagree? Why? What disagreements did the founders have about a standing army, and are they relevant today? To what extent should there be an international U.S. military presence?" You may begin.
At the time of his farewell address, Eisenhower described a newly formed concept of a military that did not disband once a war ended. Thus, it would be reasonable to fear that something so new and unknown had potential for disastrous rise of misplaced power. In the midst of the global rise in communism, however, it was still necessary to balance such worries with the guarantee of constant protection for the nation. Historically, the Founding Fathers had few reasons to create a standing military. The question of whether the United States requires a large-scale international military presence today has returned following seemingly endless wars in the Middle East, as well as other global issues that could be better solved through diplomacy, like climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic.
We agree that the military-industrial complex has gained a frightening amount of power due to the change from a wartime army to a standing one. The military-industrial complex utilized the standing army after World War II to ensure they constantly profited from conflicts which they lobbied for the U.S. to join. They have used their influence to secure over $30 billion in arms sales with the help of the government. In just the last 2 decades, defense companies spent over $2 billion lobbying to ensure that they continue to profit from their arms sales. Our government should not support companies that lobby to keep Americans in a war from which they profit. While a standing army is necessary to respond to more modern threats, allowing defense companies to push the U.S. into wars for profit exceeds any power they previously had.
Though a standing army is relevant to modern American society, the founders were skeptical of its potential for tyranny. While the Articles of Confederation could not fulfill its purpose to provide for the common defense against attacks made upon American citizens, Polybius argued a standing army would lead to domestic tyranny if not controlled. In Federalist 29, Hamilton argued the need for a militia composed of people who stand ready to defend their own rights and those of their fellow citizens. In Federalist 46, Madison emphasized the importance of a small militia that could defend the nation but not oppress the states. The ratification of the Constitution was influenced by skepticism of a standing army's power, with the Army Clause under Article 1, Section 8, giving Congress oversight to the military. While the founders' concerns were valid after the Quartering Acts and the violence of the Boston Massacre, America has grown well beyond strict isolationism post-World War II. This is evident through military maneuvers like the Truman Doctrine and the National Security Act of 1947, establishing the Central Intelligence Agency, all intended to contain communism across a newly globalized world.
American foreign policy is heavily reliant on its military presence and financial coercion. It uses these tools to spread its values, for example, in order to enforce democracy or prohibit the expansion of different ideologies. The role of the U.S. as a global policeman has become a prime topic of debate, as U.S. involvement, especially across the Middle East, has been criticized for pursuing greed and power more than promoting global human rights. For example, President Biden's recent airstrike on Syria and American failure to withdraw from the unsuccessful wars in Afghanistan and Iraq highlight current failures of American combatants. The U.S. should not continue to constantly rely on these methods of militarism, as they hamper our ability to solve problems diplomatically. Following World War II, the Marshall Plan's humanitarian aid for the purpose of containment highlights a key instance of the soft power that America should administer. Historically, America has had immense success with diplomatic solutions, such as 1949 formation of NATO, Kennedy's 1961 creation of the Peace Corps, and former President Obama's 100,000-strong initiative with China. Rather than stand on the offensive, American military presence should rely on soft power to promote diplomacy over aggression.
The expansion of global power post-World War II has turned America from its dutiful neutral position, as Washington wished, towards a more militaristic approach. While we have changed as the world has, we believe that taking a step forward diplomatically and a step back militaristically is the best approach towards positively representing our country and its beliefs. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I heard a term that, quite frankly, I hadn't heard in a while, so I'm going to ask you to further define it. What is soft power? Can you give me some detail about what that is? Soft power. I'm sure I heard it. What is it? What are the factors? Is part of it diplomacy, or is it economic? What is, I'm just curious what that term is.
I think something like the Marshall Plan would be an example of that, where we used our power for a beneficial way without necessarily like using violence. So again, like we, in the Marshall Plan, we gave money and other aid to foreign nations that had been ravaged by World War II. And so we were trying to help them rebuild without necessarily using a violent means.
Furthermore, going off of Noel's answer, the Truman Doctrine, which was established roughly around the same time period as the Marshall Plan, was to provide economic and economic aid to countries that were trying to push back against communism and trying to develop their own democratic nations. However, where we didn't see soft power was Vietnam, where we switched from defense to offense when we were implementing ourselves combatively into nations that we didn't need to. That's the differentiation between soft power and that harder, more combative nature that we have seen historically with our military.
So you all talked a good deal about the intense lobbying efforts that happen from the defense industry. And I'm just curious, in your opinion, is part of the solution to this to place stronger limits on the ability of the defense industry to lobby? And if so, what limits would those be, and how would you justify them using constitutional principles?
Currently, there are no restrictions really on defense companies due to Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Committee, which stated that for the purposes of campaign donations, companies would be viewed as a person donating instead of a company donating. And this has allowed companies to gain a lot more sway because they can lobby freely without having to worry about monetary restrictions.
Additionally, though, we have seen a rise in executive power. You kind of going back to who has control over the military. Under civilian rule of military, the president, the executive branch, and Congress, the legislative branch, have checks and balances in place. And under the Constitution, under Article 2, Section 2, president has power of commander-in-chief, and Congress, under Article 1, Section 8, has power to regulate and declare war and regulate the budget of our military. So we do see this kind of interplay between the branches, checks and balances between the branches that in turn would limit corporations if the branches were actively doing their job to regulate the military and control the military.
Okay, so you touched a little bit on the problems or the issues with the military foreign involvement. However, I want to shift a little bit to domestic focus with a question of, do you believe the U.S. military's current culture reflect the culture of American citizens? What are some of the issues that exist within the military today? And you know, is that part of what Dwight Eisenhower was kind of warning us about?
I think we can look at this historically with some of the founders' fears about the military and their potential for tyranny domestically. Like in Federalist Papers, they were argued that the military should be smaller and used to defend the states without necessarily oppressing them. But then today, we don't really see a lot of issues with that because the military is so involved in foreign matters right now.
Yeah, additionally, to go off of what Noel just said, the founders were very skeptical of the military and its potential for domestic tyranny because historically in context, that's all they were used to with the quartering acts by Britain and instances such as the Boston Massacre. That's why we have the Third Amendment. However, we know in a modern lens that the Third Amendment is basically void, that it is not a valuable part of our Constitution any further. It's not a relevant part of our Constitution. So founders were skeptical of its potential for tyranny because there was no other world power. There was no global presence abroad. We weren't a globalized world and we weren't a globalized nation. We weren't involved with other countries under Washington's neutrality proclamation. We were fairly isolationist. So all we had was that domestic presence without a standing army and the fear of what a standing army could do. However, after World War II, when we were involved and thrust into that global theater, it changed our entire country in the shift of the American citizens to a more global presence.
And I think kind of adding on to Adam's point, we can really see this shift to a more global military really after the two world wars by looking at such things as our presence in the Middle East, the Vietnam War, and even just looking at the Marshall Plan and us providing aid to other countries. Our main focus with the military has definitely become one that's more of a global policeman type rather than being domestic, as we kind of immerse ourselves in the situations of these foreign countries and continue to do so today.
And we can also really see that lack of a foreign military presence in the past. And like, there's been checks and balances now that prevent that power from becoming way too dominant internally, like with the Posse Comitatus Act, that limited the power of the federal government to use that federal military personnel to enforce domestic policies.
So Eisenhower's quote regarding the military industrial complex was presented 40, 50, 60 years ago. Should we be more concerned about the military technology complex today? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think to address Eisenhower's original quote, in the context, Eisenhower was concerned not only with economic influences of private corporations, but Eisenhower was also concerned that putting so much funding into the military in general would take away funding from other crucial programs in America internally, domestically. There's a quote by Eisenhower that every weapon manufactured is taking food away from those who are starving in our country. And I think we can see that through Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society, in which he was unable to pass and effectively pass federal free housing because of funding that was sent into Vietnam. And kind of how that pertains to your question that you asked, I think the over budget of our military today into technology and weapons today is partially to blame for the reason we have a lot of economic issues in our country today, because we're overfunding. The military roughly makes up 55% of our overall budget in our country.
And also,
Anyone else?
Oh, sorry. And
Go ahead.
also, I'm going to add to that. And also the complex tends to lead to more issues, as we've seen, than it really does solve. Because like prior to the establishment of the complex, the United States was involved in about 8 foreign wars. But after the establishment of the complex, we were involved in 15 wars, so we can see a significant increase with the establishment of the complex. And also with the federal spending, it's, I believe, 50%, 54, 50, more than 50% of our federal spending actually went towards the military, and it's projected.
All
to
right, that is time. Thank you.
Right, thank you. All right, thank you. We'd be pleased to provide you some feedback. I did enjoy your presentation. It was easy to follow your answering the main question and the subparts, and you did support your answer with citations of facts regarding the expenditures and citation to the Articles of Confederation, or the failure of the Articles of Confederation to provide for defense, citation to Hamilton, Federal 46. So I did appreciate that. Obviously, I don't know if I actually threw you a little bit, but if you're going to use terminology in your presentation or answering your questions, such as soft power, I'd never heard that before. And so I wanted to ask what your definition of soft power was. So obviously, if you're going to use terminology in your presentation or in your answers, you ought to have an idea of what you mean by that terminology. I thought your answers to our cross-examination questions were fairly on point. Obviously, answering cross-examination questions is a matter of experience, and the more you answer cross-examination questions thrown at you by team members, coaches, teachers, other people, the better you're going to be. But you're on your way to being knowledgeable and articulate about your thoughts and views, and I applaud you for that. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to echo what my colleague just said. Both in your opening statement and in the responses that you gave throughout the question and answer period, you made references to a wide variety of types of evidence, which was great. You also did a really good job anchoring a lot of your answers in articles of the Constitution themselves, making reference to the Third Amendment and whether or not it's really relevant today. I encourage you, whether in the context of We the People or as you move forward throughout your educational career, always think about that. What's the broader point trying to be made? What's the infrastructure I'm operating in? How can I use the most core elements to defend what I'm saying? My point of feedback is, sort of similar to what Dan was saying. There were some interesting terms that you used in statements that you made in your opening statement, one of which was financial coercion. And that really stuck out at me. That could have taken everybody down a gigantic rabbit hole. So, just make sure you're really intentional, and anything that you use in your opening statement, like Dan said, you will be fully prepared to talk about. Yeah, I'm really impressed with how well you all did, and I hope you feel great about it too.
Yeah, so just to add a little bit to what my colleagues mentioned, I was impressed with just the supporting evidence that you used, the constitutional application. I thought you had a really wide range that was different for this group. You answered the questions to your comfort level. Like you took your time and you answered the question and kind of connected it to your overall statement. So I appreciated that. And I thought each one of you spoke to an area that you were knowledgeable on. My feedback is sometimes there were parts of a question that weren't answered. So it is okay to tell judges, I'm going to take this question in this direction, or I'm going to answer this part of your question. It's totally fine. So like, for example, I thought you answered my question. You answered a portion of it, and you answered it really well. But there was a portion about what are some of the issues with the U.S. military domestically. I didn't hear anything, in that area. And so that's my only feedback. Just make sure you're trying to answer the question thoroughly, or let judges know I'm going to answer this part of the question. But I really liked your wide range of knowledge, and you're connecting it to historical evidence, and that you all participated to your comfort level.
Thank you.